All right. So in the previous session, we were trying to understand on what do we exactly mean by container management, right? So basically, if in a machine, after you have installed Docker, when you want to create a container, you will choose a image, and if the image is not available, you will download it, or automatically it will download, and then from that we will create a container. And we saw in that container, how do you or interactively go inside it, or you want to run certain commands or an application which will be running as a detached one, or at the same time we also saw how you can pass your own first command. Okay. And it was all about how do you create your container, start and stop your container. Now, as we move forward, so let's understand a new concept in containers. So what happens now? Let's say that if you have an application, which is a web application, when you are trying to run a web application on a host machine directly. Okay. So, okay, one second, there's some background noise. So when I say host machine, the machine in which you are installing and running generally is called as host machine. Okay. Now, if application is running, for that web application, there will be a port in which it will be listening. So this is how, if you want to access this web application, you will be accessing the port in which this application is listening. So let's say if this application is something like Apache or Nginx, then there will be a port 80 running on the host machine in which it is executed. So if you want to access this, then what will you do is you go to the URL, because it's a web application. To access, you will be using the URL, and in the URL you will be saying the machine IP colon the port in which it is listening. Okay, so this is the traditional way on how we will be accessing the application. Same way, now if there is another application running and it is running on a different port, the same way now you will say HTTP the same machine IP colon 8080. So when you say colon 80, you will access this, and when you say 8080, you will access this. So this is where applications like Jenkins or Tomcat or JBoss, they will be using port 8080. So every web application will be running on a unique port number on that machine. And if you want to access the web application, you will be accessing it using that respective port. Now, this is when, if the application is directly running on the machine. Now, when we go back to our container, and when we are trying to run a similar web application inside a container, then what happens? As we know the basic concepts, whatever you run inside the container will be within the container. So this way, now, when you try to assume the same Apache or Nginx application is being running inside a container, there will be a port in which the container will be listening, and the port will be available only within the container. So if you go inside the container and if you try to access that, like a port, whatever that you want, will be available. But now, what if from the machine level that you want to access? Then, as usual, if you go to the machine IP and the port number, that will not be available. This is because whatever that you are trying to access from the URL will be searching only on the layer of the machine. It will never go inside the machine. Whereas now, if you see, if a user wants it to access, then he will be accessing from the port level. However, that will be only on the machine. but the actual port is running inside the container. So that's where what we have to now do is something called as port mapping. Okay. So port mapping basically has two steps. So the first one, what we have to do is if you want the containers application which is running on some port which has to be mapped to another port on the host machine, then we need to first find out what is the port which is available on the host machine, and we need to map that from the port number in which the container is exposing. Okay, so for which, if you are running a container, first you need to expose the port in which the application is running. So the meaning of exposing is the container is going to tell to the host machine that, hey, look, I'm running an application in which there is some particular port which I want you to start mapping. So that way, the container has to expose the port which is running, and we need to find out what is the port available on the host machine and map to it. So when you do this, what happens? Now, on the host machine, there will be a port available which will be mapped to the actual port in which the application is running within the container. Okay, so this way, when the user accesses the URL, this goes to the host machine port, and from this port, the mapping will redirect you to the containers port. Okay, so like this, if you have multiple container, and for each container, if the application is running, then corresponding to it, you need to first expose it, and you need to find out what port is available on the host machine and map that. Now, while you are doing this, you need to remember that the port number that you are trying to take on the host machine should be available. Okay. Now, for example, let's say application inside the container is having port 8080 exposed. Now, if the same port 8080 is available on the host machine, you can map it. If some other application is already running on port 8080, let's assume, then you can map to any other available port. So it is not mandatory always that from the container, whatever the port number you're exposing, the same thing you should be using on the host. If that port is available, it's easy for you to remember. So if you access 80, you mean there is 80 running on the container. But in this case, if you see, 8081 is what I have referred. Assuming that 8080 is already taken by some other application, so you always have to map it unique. So this way, on a host machine, a port will be used only once by one application. So two applications cannot map to a single port. Whether you are mapping it from a container or a direct application is running in the host machine, you will always have a port unique. Okay, so like this, you can have multiple containers, and from each container, whatever the port is coming, you need to expose and map it to the port which is available on the host machine. Okay, for example, you can have
Uh,
another copy of this. Okay, yeah, I'll complete it. Wait, I'll have another copy of it, and that can also expose port 80. So all you have to do is exposing is not the problem. So even let's say container 1 is exposing 80, container 2 is also exposing 80. But what matters is what is the port available on the host machine, and that we are mapping. So that way, if you access, for example, port 80, then it will redirect to this application available in container 1. If you access port 8081 on the host machine, then it will redirect to second container's port 8080. Okay. The same way, within one container, you can also have multiple ports. Now, if you take some web application like Tomcat or JBoss, which is a web application or an application server, there will be two ports. Like one port is called as application management, and there will be another port called as debug port. Okay, so in those case, when two ports are being exposed from a container in an application, then to access, now if the same 7001 is available, you can map that. If not, whatever is available, you can map. So this is how going forward, remember that if you are having a web application that you want to access, you need to first create a container in which it should be exposing the port. So what is that port? This is where we need to know while creating the container, and you can expose one or multiple ports, and corresponding to that you need to know on your host machines what are the ports available and map them accordingly. And this way, as long as the container is running and the application is exposing the port, this port will be available on the host machine. So as a user, when someone wants to access, you go to the URL and you access these ports, not this. Okay. So this concept is what we call it as port mapping. And you need to do this while you're creating the container. Okay. So once a container is created, you cannot change the port or map it to a different port. As long as the container is running, in the beginning, if you have exposed and mapped to a port number, the same will be mapped. The next thing what you can do is, if you have not mapped properly, then only when the new container is created or the container is deleted and recreated, at that time you can map. But after creating a container, you cannot add a new port or map a new port, or you cannot change the port while it is running. Getting this?
Yes.
Any questions on
Yes.
what is this?
Yes, Agam.
Others?
Adam,
Yeah,
can a host on port on host can be mapped multiple containers?
I didn't get you. Come again?
Let's suppose port 80 is there. Can it be mapped
Hmm.
to two containers?
No, no, that's what I'm saying. On the host machine, one port is mapped to another port. Now, whether that is coming from this container or directly from the machine, one port is available to use only once. For example,
Oh,
if you've seen this diagram, I cannot map this as port 80 because port 80 is already taken by this app. Assuming if all this are running, then I should make this as 81 or 80, 90, something like that. Okay. In a machine, the port is available only once. So whoever wants, they can take. That could be a application or it could be a container. But no two applications can map to one port.
it's always one to one. Okay.
Adam, container one contains two applications. Those two applications individually map to two different ports at host machine, right?
Here,
Container one
we can
contain
happen
two
this.
applications.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Take up this example here.
Yeah.
Assuming there are two ports coming, then each of them can expose a port and they can be mapped to the host machine.
Okay. The port should be unique. Okay.
Yes.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Suppose, for example, our containers are running on multiple host machine. In that
Mm.
case, so the port number 80 is on the host machine is same on the every host machine.
It is going to be, but I'll talk about that. Let's not worry about orchestration now. For now, we are trying to understand on one machine. Then when we go to orchestration, we'll try to understand that.
Okay.
Hi, Adam.
Adam,
Actually, I have one question.
Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, Adam.
Adam,
Actually,
as per like port 80 will be hosted in a host machine. Like if example, many application will be running on port 80 itself in the organizations. So if it is already occupied by host machine, and if you are creating a new containers, so if any application required the particular host port 80 itself, then what can be done on that?
Okay, so that's what I said. Whatever is available. If 80 is already running, then you need to map to some other port, whatever is available on the host machine or what you are allowing in your organization. So there will be a lot of port ranges, right? So you need to choose some port and you're going to access that. So it's not always mandatory that
Okay.
80 is the only one. Other than that, there are a lot of ports available. So you can use any other port which is available and you can map to it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
But in a host machine, and we can run n number of containers, right? If it is one
Yes.
application itself, yeah, if one container itself it's taken the 80 port, so other applications they have to choose the range between the 80 to whatever the client is going to allow the port numbers, that only we have to accept. So one container, if it is
Not,
already utilized,
yeah,
am I
it's a
correct?
little change. Yeah. So it's not the client, but the host machine. And
Yeah, sorry,
how
yeah.
many containers can you run? It depends on the capacity of the machine. But yeah, logically, what you're saying is correct. And for each container, the port, whatever is exposed, a simple logic. Whatever is available on the host machine, you're going to map.
Okay.
So Adam, what I understand, we can run multiple container with separate port. Each container will be having specific port number.
Correct. So you cannot map a port twice. Okay. That's what I'm saying.
Correct.
Every port will be unique, or just like someone said, it's one-on-one mapping. So how do we do this? This is the question. Now this is where, now let's go back to our Docker. Okay. And now we have learned that the command to create a container was docker run, and we saw whether you wanted to use a -i or -t, right? But ideally, now anything that you're going to run, we will not be using interactive mode, because assume in your company you're interested to run the application inside the container. So it'll always be on a detached mode. Okay. Now, you would be giving a name to the container. Okay, that's fine. And followed by that, we saw you are going to use a image name, what you're going to run. And then we saw followed by that, what will be the first command you want to run. Now, this is what we have seen. Now, in addition to it, once again, before the image, you can give an option of saying -p and telling what ports that you want to map. And this is where whatever that you are trying to do on the Docker run is the mapping. So the expose will happen automatically from the container. That is, when the container is getting created from the image, the expose will happen. For that, while you're creating the image, you should be exposing it from the image level. Okay, so when we create the images, we will go to it. So for now, understand the expose happens when the container is getting created, and based on that, you should be doing the mapping. And when we do the mapping, you need to give two things. One is what is the port on the host machine that you want to map? So which is what we call it as host port, colon, and whatever is the port that is there in the container. Okay. So sometimes they call it as source and target. So the best way to remember is the first one that you have on the left side is the host port, and colon, the right side that you have is the container port. Okay. So an example of what we have seen in the diagram. Okay. So I can say -p 80:80. Okay. and some image. Don't worry about the image, but I'm just trying to show you. The same way, now if I run the second diagram, then it will be 80, 81 of 80, 80. Okay, this is the second one. Now suppose when I have more than one, then I can simply say hyphen P and let's say 8082 colon 7001. So this is how you will be giving the port mapping. Okay, and it has to be given when the container is getting created, not after the container is created. All right. So to take an example, what we will do, there is an image, okay, called Apache, and that has the Apache web server. So now I'll call it as my Apache. So I'm creating a container called my Apache in a detached mode, and this has port 80 mapped, and the exposing will be done by the image, and the name of the image we will just say HTTPD. Okay, now let's take this. Now before that, let me go back to my machine. Let me connect to this. That's not it. Okay. Okay. All right, my mistake. It was a different laptop. Okay, let me not waste time on this. So what I'll do, I just have to create a new machine. So that was a different laptop, so I don't have that key available. So I don't need this machine. Okay, I'll go ahead and create a new machine quickly. Ubuntu. And T2 micro is sufficient. One machine, 8 GB hard disk, and I'll take the existing default security group. And while launching, I just use the key. Okay. Okay. Connect. SSH. Okay, so there's a new machine. So first I have to do is install Docker. So I'll say apt update and apt install my docker.io. It should just take a couple of seconds. Okay, so we have Docker to cross-check Docker info. Fine. So now let's go ahead and try running this command. So the basics here is the image is not available. So the image is getting downloaded from the default registry. Okay, and the container will get created and the first command will get executed and it is going to run in the detached mode. So if you see, the container is running on port 80 and that is being mapping to the host machine's port 80. Okay, so the first question here is, we just gave the image, but we never told what to run inside the container. And that is actually running a command called HTTP foreground. So who ran this? So whenever you create an image, there will be a default command available. That could be a command or a script. So if a user doesn't pass anything, then that is what is going to automatically get executed. Just like how for CentOS image, bin bash was there, for the Apache image, HTTP foreground is the command. So that way, it should be easy for a user where you shouldn't or you have to remember what is the command. Okay. Now, when the container is running, now this is where if I want to check what is happening inside it, whether my container is running properly and the application is there, then I can just simply say Docker logs, and you can see that the command which is actually running inside the container is httpd-d foreground. Okay, so that way you can also cross check. Now, how do I know whether the port 80 from the container is mapped? So you can simply say netstat-an and grep for 80. Now, just in case if it says netstat itself is not there, we have to install. Okay, yeah, it says it's not there. So let's go ahead and install apt, install nettools. So docker ps, and you can just say netstat, and you can see there is a port 80 which is listening on the host machine. So this is nothing but the port 80 which is mapped to the container. Okay, so what you can do is netstat-an and grep for your port. Okay, and now if I want to cross check, I can say curl, which is on the same machine. I can say localhost 80. Okay, so anytime if you want to refer to the same machine, okay, then you can quickly say localhost. So now you can see when you access port 80, this is redirecting to the 80 of the container, and in the container 80 is being exposed by Apache, and this is the default web page that you can run. Okay, so this is that within the machine this is working. Now if you want to access this, then what you should be doing, now this is where in order to access this from the host machine, you can go to the AWS and go back to the instances, and what is the IP that you are going to use? Now this is where choose this machine, and you will be getting something called as a public DNS. Okay, so come down and choose this, and now you are going to access this. Okay, now when I'm trying to access this, so I can say HTTP. If not, by default, when I just say, it will be appending HTTP. Now, if I am trying to access port 80, this is where what you have to understand. The next thing is, in AWS, this port 80 should be allowed for you to access. So there is a machine within AWS and you are trying to access it. And that machine is in your private account. So that is where, for every account we saw in the beginning where I was explaining you, there is something called as a VPC or a private network. Okay. So when you work, there is a private network for you. And inside that, you can set up something called a security group, which is what acts as a firewall to decide what is allowed inside the AWS connection and what type of connection is not allowed. So that is where we had already added port 80 on the security group. If not, anytime going forward, when we have to add a new port number, then go to the security group here on the left side of your EC2 dashboard. And in this, you will be having only one security group, which is the default security group. So choose this. And here in the inbound rule, you can add that port 80. Now we had already added for HTTP. Suppose assume in the next example, I want to add port 8080. Then if it is not there, click on edit inbound rule and add custom TCP and whatever the port that you want, and then from which IP range that you want to access. So for us to practice, it will always be 000. Okay. So since this is already given, now if you go and access this, you can see the same web page is running. Okay. Now, like this, you can run as many containers that you want. Now, let's say I want to run another container. This time, I have another web server called as Nginx. Okay. Now that runs also on port 80. So this is where I don't want the same port 80 to be available. So instead, I will say, for example, 8081 colon 80, and the name of the image itself is Nginx. Okay. And once again, I'm not giving the startup command because I don't know. So automatically, whatever is the default startup command, it will be taken. Okay. Now, if I give 80 here, it will give me an error because 80 is already taken by some other container and that is running. So this way, I can map this. So let me clear the screen. So Nginx is not there, so it's downloading the image. And this is where you are running all these things in detached mode because I don't want to go inside. And you can see 8081 of the host machine is mapped to the containers 80. Same way to cross check, grep 8081, it is available. And quickly to cross check here whether it is available on the same machine, you can say curl localhost 8081. Now this is the default web page for Nginx that you are able to access. Now, if I have to access, okay, then the same, if I say 8081, okay, now it is not accessing. That is because on my security group, whatever I have used in creating the machine, in that I have not allowed 8081. So quickly go here, edit inbound, scroll down, you can see there is no 8081. So I will add custom TCP 8081 and I will allow this. Okay. And I don't have any specific reason for 8081, just an example. So go ahead and save. Okay. And now if you come here and refresh, you can see Nginx is accessible. So 80 is being mapped to the first container running Apache. 8081 is mapped to second container running Nginx. So it's all about we understanding what is the containers port exposed. Okay. Now, the biggest advantage using Docker image is there are plenty of images already available which has lot of application. So if there is an application now that you want to run on any machine, rather than you installing it, you can actually take an image and everything is available, just like Apache image that you saw, whether you want a database or whether you want some other application, you can simply create an image or check if an image is available, and using that image, your container can be created, and inside that application will also come up. Okay. Now, one of another popular tool that you would be using is Jenkins. So let's say I want to install Jenkins. Now, to install or set up Jenkins, first you need to install Java, and then you need to install Jenkins and then start Jenkins. Instead of all these things, there is an image already available inside which you have Jenkins pre-installed. So all you have to do is take that image and create a container. Automatically Jenkins will be running because I don't even have to give the startup command. Okay. So now assume I want to do that. So I will say docker run name my Jenkins. And again, I want to run in detached mode. And I have a port called 8080 and I will map to 8080. And the name of the image itself is Jenkins. Okay. So here, now let me go here and run. Okay, so it says that 80, sorry, Jenkins latest is not found. All right. Now, in this case, let's search Docker search Jenkins. Okay, so there are plenty of Jenkins images available. Okay, so one of the latest image what we have is Jenkins/Jenkins. Okay, so now let's just change this. Okay. It is not Jenkins. The name of the image is Jenkins/Jenkins. So let's try this now.
Madam, we cannot confirm that this image has been created from official Jenkins guys, or this image can be created by anyone in the world, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about the registry. Right now, if you remember, I told we are going to use it from a default registry. But as we move, you can also have your own private registry, and that is where only you would have the access, or only the people within the company have access. So that way you will be using. Right now, we are using everything which is open source.
Okay.
We still didn't go into the actual use cases. We are just trying to understand Docker. So now you can see Jenkins is there, and this is where you can see in Jenkins there are two ports which is actually running. One is 8080 and another one is 50,000. Now this is for console management. Anyway, we are not interested in that. So the only thing what we need is to access the application's dashboard. So that is running on port 8080. Okay. So this way, depending on your application, whatever is getting exposed from the container, you can go ahead and map it to your host machine. And now port 8080 is already added in the security group. Okay, this is already there. So now if I just go and change this to 8080, you can see you're able to access the Jenkins dashboard. Okay, so we have almost 3 ports which is being mapped from the container. Okay, so this is how at any time you can create a container, expose and map. Okay, now here if you look at this page, it says to unlock Jenkins, it is asking us to read the content of this file and put it here. Okay, now where is Jenkins running?
The container.
Yeah, inside the container. Now where is this folder available then?
Inside the container.
Inside the container.
Inside the container. Okay, so I want to read the content of this file now. How can I do that?
Docker exe.
Exactly. So this is where I don't want to go inside the container. Without attaching, I want to read. Then simply I can say docker exe, the container name, which is my Jenkins, and I can simply say cat and this file.
My Jenkins.
Name.
Okay. So you can see I didn't do anything by going inside. So the container is still running. Okay. And I can just give this. Okay. So you're accessing the dashboard. Anyway, we will see this again. Don't worry. So that's how, whenever you're going forward, you're going to expose a port coming from the container, and corresponding to that, you're going to map it. Okay. So this is what we call it as port mapping. Clear so far?
Yeah, hi Adam. I have a question. Actually, we are running multiple applications in the container, and how will we get to know that these are the ports available to map in the host machines?
That we have to do. Docker doesn't know anything. So we are the one who are giving it, right? So this is where if you are going to create a container, you should be knowing on the machine what are the ports you are allowing, what is the port currently available, and based on that you should be mapping it.
Adam, I have
Okay.
one question actually, and for
Yeah.
Nginx, you have mapped the port from 8081 to 80, means
Mm-hmm.
the 80 port number which is in the within the container. And if I wanted to access this Nginx this web portal with the 80, can I use the image and 80 port number? Is it can I access, or only I need to the context URL? Always I need to use the 8081 only.
See, if you are directly accessing container, then your port 80 will work. But by going to a URL, can I connect to my container? No. The only thing you can do is connect to the machine. So that is where when you are connecting, if a port is available on the host machine, you can connect. Okay. But if I go inside the machine, here I can access the container. So that is where I can directly access the port 80 and it will work for me. Okay. So since you cannot access your container from this URL, you are mapping it to the host machine, and whatever the port that host machine is giving you, that is what you are going to access.
Okay. Okay.
Getting it?
Yeah.
Okay. So remember, going forward anytime, if you want to access a application, which is a web application, then the next thing that should come to your mind is mapping a port in the container. Okay. Now, in the
Madam,
same way, yes.
yeah, so for example, you gave for Nginx is 8080 port number. Okay, so for I want to create another container in that machine. So how can I know that that port 88 is already used?
See, that is what I'm trying to tell you. It is your responsibility to make sure that to know what are the ports available in that machine and what port has been used already, so that when you create a new container, that particular port is, or I mean, should not be used. So how do you know? The only way is go back and do a netstart command and see whether that particular port is already listening. If it is listening, then you should be using some other port. Okay.
Yeah, fine. Thanks.
Adam, like you
Got it?
told, there will be two ports. So how that will be used in real time logically? In what scenarios like two ports can be created and the image is being created from that port?
See, just now I told in Jenkins also, whenever you have some applications, the application will have one port for console management and there will be another port for debugging. Okay. So if you take whether it is Jenkins or Tomcat or JBoss, to access the application, there will be one port. Okay. That is called as console port or console management. There will be another port to do some debugging from a developer side. If you want, you can expose that and you can access it. So that is how sometimes application can also have more than one port. Okay. And it's not just two, you can also have more than two also. So a simple way to understand is there could be a console management port, there could be a debug port or any other port additionally that is needed for monitoring or other purpose also you can have.
Thank you.
Got it? Okay. Now what I was trying to tell here is we are talking only about the port mapping. Okay. Now, what if a container is running and inside the container there is a folder, okay? And you want to access that folder from the host machine. Now, practically, what will happen the same way, like how a port is there, whenever you install some app and run, it will be running in some folder and this folder is going to be available within the container only, okay? Now, because of this, there will be a lot of scenarios where if you want to put some content inside this container, then how are you going to access it? Okay. Now you can say that I will use Docker exe, but that will not be always the right way because when I have multiple containers, I should be able to easily go to a folder and access and do certain things with that. Same way, another scenario is what if you want to take a backup of this folder? Now, when this container is deleted, everything inside this is also getting deleted. So that is where, if a container is running, if you want to take some backup, which is nothing but whatever folder that you want inside the container, you should be able to access it outside the container. Okay. Whether it is because you want to do some backup or read some logs of the application or you want to put some content inside the container. Okay. Then in both the scenarios, now the folder is not accessible directly from the host machine. Now this is where, just like how we did port mapping, we can also do a folder mapping. Okay, so for this, what we have to do first is in the host machine, you can create a folder, okay, and map that to a folder in the container, okay, and this way, whatever is available in the container can be accessed in the host machine, and the same way, anything that I put inside my host machine will also be available inside the container. So it is going to be a two-way share. And whenever you want to do this, while you are creating the container, there is something logically which you have to create called as volumes. Okay. So for every container, you can logically create a shareable folder called as volume that will help to map a folder inside the container and a folder on the host machine. Okay, so volume or shareable folders that you can use to map a folder inside a container and a folder on the host machine, so that anything that you do it on the host machine will be available to the container, and same way whatever that you put here can be accessible from the host machine. Okay, so this way now when you are running an application inside a container, while creating the container, you can map the volumes just like the port. Then, when a container is running, if the application is storing some files in some folder, you can go to the host machine and you can start reading it from here. If you want a backup, you can take the backup from here. If the application is putting some log here, that is also available here. So you can take the log. Sometimes we do something called as log rotation, that is delete older logs. So to do that, you don't need to go inside the container. Everything is available on the host machine. You can simply take that and delete older logs or take the backup of it. Or if you want to put some files, if I put it inside this folder, that will be accessible inside the container in this folder. So that's way. Now, a folder which is being shared in two ways is called as a Docker volume. Okay, and that is specific to the container. So this is how, when a container is created, you can create a volume and map. Okay. Now, remember this once again, after creating the container, you cannot map this. So only while you are creating the container, you can generate a volume and map. So logically, for every mapping that you do, there will be a volume created internally using the Docker daemon, and that will be managing. As a user, what you will see is just a host machine folder mapped to a container folder. Okay. And the advantage of this volumes is, even when the container is not running, the volumes will be still accessible. That means if this container is not running, still if you go to this folder, you will be able to access whatever is the file which is there in the entire folder, and anything that you modify will be again stored, so that when you start the container, you should be able to see that the same files, whatever you modified, is also accessible. But if the container itself is deleted, then the volume which is being mapped or shared will also get deleted. But as long as the container is running or not running, doesn't matter, the volumes will be accessible. So this is how, when you create a container, you can share the content from the container to the host machine, or whatever that you need from the host machine inside the container. So for that, you need to choose which folder from the host machine you need to map and create as a volume. Now, what we can also do is, we can also have separate folders for each container. If not, when you are running multiple containers, you can map a single folder to the containers. For example, here if you see, I'm trying to put one folder called var_log in the host machine that is pointing to this folder as well as this folder in this container. Now what will happen? Both the containers content, whatever you put in this directory or in this directory, will be directly accessible in the var_log. And at the same time, anything that I put in this folder will be accessible in this container as well as in this container. Okay. So that's where, when you have multiple containers, you can access everything like log files, which is one of the normal use case for volume. And in some use cases, if you try to understand this logic, when I have a single folder which is being mapped to multiple containers, assume I go inside this container. In this folder, I put one file. Now this will be visible to this folder. and anything visible in this folder is also visible in this folder. So if I go to this directory in the second container, the same file will be accessible. So that is where if you want to share something between two containers, then it is the same by using volumes, so that you will have the same volume map between two containers. So the need for volumes in Docker is to create a special shareable folder that can share something from the host machine to the container or between two containers. Okay, so this again has to be done while you are creating the container, not after you have created the container. So you should know what folder that you are going to map. Okay, now to show you this, how will you do that mapping? So just like how you had -p, you can just say -v, and you are going to say the same way host directory colon container directory. Okay, remember the same way. Left side is host, right side is the container. An example here now, what we can do is docker run. Now to show you this example, now since if you are mapping some folder, if I want to go inside, let me just give it as C1 and I will give it in a interactive mode. Okay, and we will use CentOS and WinBash, and I want to map it. So this is where I will say on the host machine, there will be a folder called temp host, and this I can map to a folder called temp container. Now, if this folder is not available inside the container, it will create. Okay. Now, what we can do is on this machine, you can see on the host machine, there is no temp host, right? So now when I run this, okay, so we are inside the container. Now, if I go to the container, and here you should see a new folder called container. Now, this is created by the container during runtime. Now it is completely empty. So whatever I store in this folder in the container will be accessible on the host machine from temp host. Okay, just to show you, I'll say dummy file, and I'm inside the container in the folder temp container. Now, watch this. When I do exit, what will happen? The container will get stopped, correct? But still, if I go to this folder on the host machine, now it is created, and you can see this file, dummy file, is available now. Okay, so that way, if I try to access from the host machine, I can do. Same way, if I want to create another file, so on the host machine, if I modify anything on this folder, it will also be available inside the container. Even though the container is not running, you can see it is accessing. Now let's quickly start the container. Docker start C1. Okay, and now I can just go inside by saying docker attach C1. Okay, and now if I go to temp container folder, you can see this file is also available. Okay, so this is how what we can do is you can create a container, and while creating you can map a volume so that you can access the folder whatever is going to be available from the container to the host machine. Okay, and one more thing what you need to know is when a container is running, when you are mapping a volume, you can access the folder from the host machine. So you can take a backup, or you can do a log rotation by deleting the older files. Okay, same time, if you delete a container, now let's say that I am deleting the container. Now there is no such container called C1, okay? But still, when you are going back, you can see while deleting the container leaves the copy of the file on the host machine what you have mapped. Okay, so this way the volume leaves a copy on the host machine. So this is how you will always have the content. But if you had a previous content, that you will not be getting because the container itself is gone. However, when you have done a mapping on the host machine, the content will be just left as a copy. So this is where now when you are creating a container, you should know what is that you want to do. Do you want a detached container, which is what 99.99% you will do. But when you are creating a container, the minimum things that you need to now know is what is the name for the container, what is the application and the port that you want to map, and what is the volume that you want to map so that you can access it from the host machine, and what is the name of the image using which the container is going to create, and for this container what will be the first command. Okay, so this is how, depending on your need, you're going to pass the option, but ideally as we move forward you're going to do all of them at some point of time. So that is how you take an image, create a container, pass whatever the first command you want, or the default command will be taken. In that, there will be a port map and there will be a volume map so that you can access the folders and files using this volume, and you can access the application using this port, and the name of this will be uniquely to refer, and it will be running in the detached mode. Okay, clear until
Yeah,
now?
Adam. Yeah, if I wanted to add, it's multiple file systems. It's like temp host. If I want to extend even multiple host file systems, like -v extension, can I give while creating the container?
What do you mean by extensions? I didn't get that.
No, it's because now you have given it's a -v temp host, and you have mapped from local host to the one container. But again, I
Mhm.
need additional means it's another folder which I would like to add.
Yeah, you can do it in the beginning. As I said in the earlier case, after creating a container, you cannot do any mapping. So when you are creating, for example, I can have another V here, maybe
Okay,
something different just to show you. This
okay,
way I can do,
this way.
but not after creating the container.
Okay, okay, sure.
So Adam, hello.
Yeah.
So when we are mapping one location to another, one container location to the host location, so when we are mapping these locations, so how do we know which file is related to which container?
Yeah, that is from our container level to manage. Okay, we will never know it because everything is going to be available in one folder. So it is the responsibility of the person who is creating the container. And when you are trying to write the application, you need to make sure that the file is unique. Okay, as you said, if you don't do anything, the same file name is there, it will be there. But I know when I'm running my application, I know that what are the folders and files that I will be having. So based on that, I'll be able to differentiate. If not, you need to make sure that there is a unique way to identify that files because it's just a folder. So with you, if you go inside this folder, you need to know what files are coming from which container so that you will be able to differentiate it. So there should be some naming convention or pattern that has to be taken care by the application level.
Yeah, is it redirecting or copying?
It's kind of copying,
It's
not
kind of copying.
redirecting.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
so local. The container having the same file system, and the files will be there in the container and as well as in the host machine as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, Adam, when we change that any changes, when we do any changes in the varlog, are they going to affect in both the container one and container two?
In this example, yes. If you modify a file and If that file is available here, it will get changed, and the same file will also be visible here.
Sure. Thank you.
Because like is it really going to affect the space issue also, right, Adam? Because like normally we will get the in web sphere application varlog file system, which is frequently it's getting full. So is it going to affect the file system? Because like that depends
Yes.
upon the application volume, we have to increase the capacity as well, but really going to affect the file system,
Yes, it
what
is
I'm
there.
thinking. Yeah.
It is. That's the reason you have to do a log rotation of, you know, changing things. So if you keep all the logs, see, that is where when you are mapping, you are not going to map a parent folder like root, because everything inside the container will come. So you are interested only to access some logs or some file, only that folder you keep, so that from this container, only those folder and subfolder will be visible to you, or only that folder with whatever the files available. So most common use cases, like I said, is if there is some configuration file that you want to inject, or if there is some log files that you want to read, only that is what you're going to map it as a volume. And that you frequently do a rotation, so that keep the latest and delete the oldest. So that will ensure you that there is enough space available.
And in real time also, who will decide? Is it by the application team, or DevOps engineer will going to decide this particular file system has to be there in the host machine as well?
Application will not talk about it. It is up to the person who is managing this, because if you're responsible for deployment, okay, again, I don't want to use this word called DevOps engineer every time, because anyone can be a DevOps engineer. So it is just the responsibility. Okay. If a QA guy can himself do this, then he's going to be taking up the DevOps responsibility. Okay. So let's not get into this word, which I really, it's not like I hate, but it's just people just give a hype saying DevOps engineer. It's all about anyone can do. That's how eventually everything will be there. So whether you are a QA guy and you want to take care of this container management, then it's your responsibility to tell where the folder mapping will be there. Or if you are a support engineer who's going to do it, then it's your responsibility. Or if you are an admin who's going to take care of it. So ideally, the point is whoever is taking care of the responsibility of running this container should take care of it.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Now, this is what we call it as container management. Okay. So practically, now you should have a knowledge when, for some use case, if an image is given to you, you should be able to know how to create container. Okay. Now, in that, we will never ever use this command at all. Trust me. This is the last because there are different ways to do. But why did we see this? Is when you are creating the container, you understood how different things are needed, like the detached mode, the name, the port number, the volume mapping, the image, and first command. Now, this is what it is needed for you to understand. So tomorrow, if I say, hey, I want a container, people will not say container. They will say that, hey, I have an application put into the image, I want to run or I want to access. Then you should know how to create the container. And for that, what are the things that you need? Okay. So that's how logically you are going to think and create a container by passing these options. Okay. So clear so far?
Yes, Adam.
Okay.
Yeah,
There
yes.
is not a big task in this, because to give you the actual responsibility, I'll come little later. But for now, if there is a responsibility given to you, or for any use case, you want to create a container, then you need to know these things, which is what is the takeaway that we are going to have as of now. Okay. Now let's not worry about other things, from where did I take, how many containers did I run, in which machine did I run. That's separate. For now, we understood if there is a requirement, okay, because use cases will come after that. But now, for any purpose, we saw the problem statement. That is, if I want to run multiple applications, It is not possible because that is where the whole restaurant example that I was giving, or when you're trying to run tests or running applications on different machines, then we saw there is a problem on how the environment might be mismatching or something might not be running. Then for all those cases, instead of running the application directly, now I can put it as a container. Now for that, if the image is given to you, you should be able to take that image in a machine, create a container and run. But for running a container, what is the basics you need? The name, running it in detached mode, the port number, the volumes to map, the image name, and what command to run. Clear on this?
Yes,
Yes.
Adam.
Yes, Adam.
Okay. So we are actually ready now to get into other concepts. Okay. So just to quickly rephrase, going forward, anytime when I say a container management, it is nothing but given an image, you should be able to know how to create a container. So that's the basics. And before that, we saw something called as continuous development, which is where for any kind of tasks that you're trying to automate, if you are going to develop some code or some file, then what is that you're going to do? You will create a repository in GitLab, and in that, create a proper branch and start developing and pushing the code after your review into that. So that is the continuous development process. Okay, so that is where if it is for a release, then you have a proper feature branching structure that you are going to use. And in case if it is not for a release, but if it is for something like for your own development to store some files, then you don't need a feature branching model. You can use a simple test or a production branch and you can just try to store. But logically, you need to have some kind of branch and a repository. Okay, so this is where so far for all these things you need to know what is Git as a client. You need to know the process of agile, on what tickets you will create, when to create for whatever purpose, and how do you manage those repositories in GitLab. And finally is the Docker stuff that we saw. Again, there's no connection between that, but let's see how it's going to be used further. Okay, so any questions in this?
Adam, I have a doubt
Yes.
regarding the port setup. No, actually, will the author of the image will specify any port in that image? Suppose
Yeah,
in the
that is still
upper
to be exposed. While creating the image, you need to expose that.
okay, so suppose if there is an image specified in the if there is a port specified in the image, like in the upper suppose I am creating an image and I am specifying an 80 port in the image. After that, while creating the container, I am specifying that I am specifying minus with port minus p equal to 8080 minus p equal to
Mm.
8080. So will it override the settings on the image?
No. See, this is where if you see all this, the one on the right side is coming from the container. So that I cannot change because the
Okay.
thing that is available inside the container is what is exposing. But whatever that you have on the left side is what you have the choice to change. For example, if I take this and if I change this as 8081, it will give me no error. But when you try to access 8081 on your host machine, there is nothing which is mapped because inside the container there is nothing running. See, logically there is no error, but there is no mapping, right? Only if there is actually running something, you will have a map. You are trying to map something to a port which is not at all available. So that is where when you go to your host machine and access this, it will not even work because there is nothing available. So that is where you should know what exactly is running and you should be made by mapping to that.
Okay. 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 Fine.
Okay. Okay. Exposing mean that we have to mention the port number
to connect
Yeah,
with
well,
the
let's talk
port
about.
number which.
I'll tell you what is exposing when we create an image. Don't worry. So for now, just remember this much, that the image generation will decide what port is this. So that is where Apache's port 80 is coming from the image. This is coming from image. This 8080 is coming from the image. Okay. So how do you give what is the port number? So while we create the application, we will see that. Sorry, while we create the image, we will see. Okay.
Okay. But
Sure.
also one more thing. You said
Yeah.
you previously mentioned that we can use multiple port number for a container, like in the case of
Correct.
Jenkins. Okay, so we
Hmm.
are using the -p command multiple times while creating.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. In the first example I showed you, right? I can put two hyphen p's.
Yeah, -v. Okay,
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
type you can use -p, right? Okay,
Adam, can
thank you.
you
Yeah.
explain
So
again?
don't focus.
Can you explain about the port that we are giving? Just you explain, right? Can you explain again? How do I get the port
See,
of
what
a
I want
container?
you to understand is if you want to access an application, the application inside the container has one port, that is this. And what is the port that you are mapping to the host machine is this. Okay. Now you decide whatever the port is available on the machine that you can give. That is where the reason you can see I can give 8081 or 8082, whatever it is there, it will work. But before you create this container, you should know what is the port that is going to come from the machine. Sorry, coming from the container. So that is what, while someone is creating the image, they have to expose it. Okay, so while we create an image, we will see. So that way, this port is coming from the image. Okay, now this you cannot change. If Apache is running, Apache is going to run on 80, and this is what is that you are going to receive from the container. So that is decided by the image. Okay. Same way, this 8080 is decided by this image. So when this image is getting converted into a container, you will get 8080. So that is how the container port is decided by the image, what to give you, and mapping that to a host machine, you decide what it has to be on the left side. Okay.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks, Adam.
Adam, yeah, regarding to the port number, so just now you said that it is based upon the image. But what about the
Yes.
container directory? I mean, if I'm taking the responsibility of
Same thing.
container management, then
Same
how can
way
I know?
here, that's what I'm saying. Same way to show you this was nothing, empty. But in this diagram, if I say, when I'm running, for example, Jenkins, now this folder should be already available, right? So that is where before you do all the container creation, you need to know what are the folders which will be available that you want to map. That is when, while you create an image, you should decide these kind of things and make sure that the application inside the image will be running on a port, and there will be a folder available before you even container is created, right? So you need to make sure all those things. That is where the image creation process will come. For now, I just showed you an empty folder that created. If not, there should be a folder already available inside the container. So that will come from the image. So that is right. For now, the image is given to you, you're just consuming it. So later on, all these questions comes is why this 80? What if I want to make sure there's a different port? Then you should know what application that you are going to put inside the image, what folder that you want to create, all those things you will see.
So if my host directory contains some files already, will those files will be
Yes.
visible in the container directory after creating?
Yeah.
So existing
Yes.
files also
That is
will be
what is the
visible.
two-way.
Yeah, got it.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to do is I want you guys to take one assignment. Okay, and then come back. So the first thing what I want you to do is I want you to do this project. Okay, because I showed you the same, but I just want you to redo it. Okay, it's not a big deal as a project for GitLab. Now assume for a release, okay, or for a product, okay. So I want to have totally 3 features generated. Okay, what is it? I have 3 features that I'm developing, and I want to give it as 2 separate releases. All right. So totally, I'm developing 3 features in a product. Okay. Out of that, so what I want to do, I want to give release 1 with 2 features, and release 2 with single feature. Okay, getting this? And now, if I want, like I said, instead of having separate release, I can also have a combined release. Okay, so what I want is, give me a branching where create a branching structure where I can do parallel development for each release. Okay, and I can do parallel release as well as I should be able to combine both release 1 and 2, do a full release. Okay, so think of this logic, and the answer is already there, what we did in the previous class. So I just want you to come up with a branching diagram for this. Okay, wherein at any time, if I want, I can release separately first release, or I do a release separately second one, or if I want, before doing this, I want to combine and take everything as one release, and then also I should be able to do. Okay, so try to come up with a branching strategy for that. Okay, and I want you to create it in your GitLab. Got it? And assume for this, I am the user. Okay, what is it? Assume that I am going to be the developer. Okay, and out of that, so if you want, you can add my email. So this is my email. So make this email developer on all the feature branches. Okay, and I'll give you another ID. Make this guy as the maintainer. Okay, got it? So what I want you to do, take this email ID and make this guy as developer for all the feature branches. It's okay. And make this guy as the admin for the project and maintainer. So basically, whatever the merges that I'm going to do, only this person should be able to do it. Okay, so I want you to create a project in GitLab and set this. Okay, did you get what is my question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So when I log in, I should be able to merge only using this user. I should not have access to this. Okay, and the same way, when I try to develop, I should have permissions to modify and store only on the feature branches. Okay, now this is just a small project. You do it. However, I'll get you the answers for that, but I want you to think and start doing it. All right.
Okay.
All right. Fine. Now, We still have some time. So, okay, one more request. It's just that there will be a lot of people on the group, outside our group, in some public groups. Right? See, for the WhatsApp group, it is only for us, the students, okay, that you're part of this batch. When you go to any other public batches, there will be a lot of people who might just ping you and ask, to share. Okay, they might say that they are an old student or whatever the reason. So try to understand, please do not share anything outside this class. Okay, it might sound that you're helping someone, but you're not actually helping, because those guys, there are a lot of people who are not intending to learn. They're just trying to do business. They're just selling off certain things. Okay, so it's your hard-earned money that you are trying to take up this batch and you are investing your time. So I appreciate if you share your knowledge, but not anything that we are going into the class. Okay, so please keep it, because these are some of the small things which differentiates between you and someone who knows only logic. Okay, so that's how we'll be having a lot of projects and a lot of things to discuss. I want you to make note of this and start preparing, and whatever the documents you're giving, please use it for your own self-learning. And if someone in the group pings you, please let me know so that I'll talk to them or just redirect them to me. Other than that, anyone who's just asking a doubt, be more, I'll be more happy if you can share some knowledge saying what you know. So there's no concern on it. Just don't share these kind of things. Okay. Anyway, so now what we have done so far is, I won't call it as a full module as we have a lot of things to learn, but we understood what is continuous development and we just saw what is container management. Okay, so let's stop at this level and let's focus on the actual module that you're going to start first, which is called as infrastructure as a code. Okay, so today probably I'll just give you the overview so that from tomorrow we can just dig in deeper into it. Okay. So now, when you start working, you will be having different kinds of roles and responsibilities to perform, right? So let's say whether you are going to do some development or you are going to do some testing work or some kind of automation you want to do, or you want to do some deployment work or support work, administration, now whatever you are doing, you need an infrastructure to work. Okay, so this is where, what do you mean by a infrastructure or an IT infrastructure? Anyone? Even for example, we just created a Docker containers and run. I needed an infrastructure.
We
It's
need
not just a
machine,
machine. Yes,
like
it's not
RAM,
just a machine.
storage.
It's called as infrastructure. Yeah. So what
Inter
do you mean by infrastructure?
internet.
Combination of network, storage, hardware, the software.
Mhm.
Resource to perform the activity.
All the resources, right?
Yep.
That way, it's not just a machine. So if you now look at it, what and all you have? Okay, so you have hardware, you need software, you need a network, and you need certain exact access to it, and you need to follow a process to get all these things done, right? Now let's take AWS itself. For us to create a Docker container, what and all we needed? So we need a AWS account, okay? And since you are using free tier account, you have every access. But if not, when you go to a company, they will be creating a new account for you, which is what we generally call it as IAM, okay, Identity Access Management. And that is how you will have permissions to work on only certain things. Then the next thing is, you need to have your own network, which is what is VPC. But what happened when we are practicing, I didn't want you to create, because if you're not familiar, it's okay. But there is a separate network. Now, inside the network, there was a separate security group that you have to create and allow and decide what should be accessed and not accessed. So that is how now you need to have a particular network, and after that is what you are going to create a machine, right? And inside the machine, you are going to install some things, whatever is dependent, like apt update you did and apt install Docker you did, right? And then you started using the Docker CLI. So that is how, for any kind of work that you do, there's actually a lot of things which is a combination of this is what we call it as an infrastructure. Okay. So why are we talking about? Now, when we do our day-to-day work, there could be already existing infrastructure which needs to be modified. Like I have a machine. Now, along with one machine, I might need another machine. Okay. Maybe not everything here, but only the machine, which is nothing but the hardware I need. Or there could be a scenario in which I have to create a complete infra right from scratch. So that is how what happens, depending on the type of work, there could be something where you are creating everything from scratch, or there could be an infrastructure which you are customizing or modifying to your needs. Okay. Now that's when the problem which we are focusing or the problem statement comes. Okay. So far, what is that we were doing? As a developer, as a QA, as an application support engineer, as a DBA guy, or as a storage guy, okay, or a WebLogic or a WebSphere administrator, what was your work? A machine will be created and you will be just running something, whatever that you want, right? But now, what is DevOps? It is about taking additional responsibility. And this is where now, if the request, whatever that we had, was always being given to some administrator, then what was the process that you should have been following in the company? So assume that your company uses some ticketing mechanism like ServiceNow. Okay. Now, Jira is mainly used for the agile management. But when you go to these kind of service requests for infrastructure, most of the company uses a tool called ServiceNow or SN. Now, what you will do, you have to raise a ticket and wait until it is fixed, because there will be one central team, like a support team or an admin team, who will be taking all the tickets from different users. Now, what will happen? Even for a single machine that you want to create, you need to raise a ticket, wait until it is approved, and after that, when it is created, you are going to use it. Okay. So there's a lot of time that is being wasted. And not just that, what will happen is, if you are going to create an infrastructure, let's assume a cloud, then assume if you are taken the responsibility of it. Okay. Now, for you to do that, you have to go to a console like AWS, click many buttons, and then create a machine, right? When I'm trying to do or create a machine, what and all we did? So we logged into AWS console, then we went to EC2 service, and then clicked on launch instance, choose the machine or AMI type, and then take the storage type or how many CPUs and RAM I need, which security group, how much of hard disk, right? So there are a lot of buttons that we have to click just for one machine. Now assume if you are going to take care of like this for multiple users, then how much of activity that you might have to do. Okay. So the focus, what we are trying to do is, whether someone is taking care of the infrastructure, then as the volume of the infrastructure grows, volume in size of the infrastructure grows, there will be lot of manual things that you have to click, get it done, right? Which is going to be a concern for us. So how do you simplify that? Which is one thing that we need to know. Now, in the same way, if you come back, assume that there is a cloud admin, just like how you had a VM admin, there would be a cloud admin who will be taking care of managing the entire AWS infrastructure. Okay. Now, what will happen is, when he has to create an infrastructure for different work. Then he will be using some dashboards in AWS, click and create machines. There are a lot of chances where you will not be able to track, okay, because you will have multiple regions and multiple resources created. It's not just a machine. Now you will have security group, you will have machine, and for the machine there will be some storage like EBS, and there will be some network and then subnets, and it keeps adding. So by mistake, if you have created something and you have forgotten to stop or delete later, then it is going to cost a lot, right? Even for your practicing, that's the reason most of the times we prefer to use everything default, because if you create something by mistake and if you're not deleting, then it will be costing. Now that way, from an organization think, when you are managing too many things, then it is completely prone to error when you do it manually. And by mistake, if you are trying to do a over provisioning, and that will also be an issue. Okay. Then if once again you wait for another person to do all those things, then it is not only prone to error, it is time consuming process. So how do I repeat it? Correct. Now let's assume you did one task for one person or one team, and the same thing, if we have to repeat it for multiple people or multiple projects, then every time it has to be repeated manually. You have to do the same process from the beginning. So that is where, for managing and creating infrastructure, the traditional process will be time consuming, prone to error, and there are a lot of chances that you do over provisioning, and that is going to be costing a lot. Now, this is one of the problem if you are an administrator. However, in the concept of DevOps, maybe you are not going to set up an entire infrastructure. But now, if there is a need, at least we should be able to create our own machines. Very simple logic. Okay, I don't want you to set up everything in AWS, but if you want to do some development work or testing or support work, for creating a simple machine, rather than you going to someone and raising a ticket or clicking so many buttons and wasting time to create, if there is an automated way where you can create your infrastructure whenever you want and manage, then it will be easy. Okay, that is how. Now the first problem is, every one of us are expected to have a knowledge on managing the infrastructure which is needed by us. Now, the level of infrastructure management can vary depending on what is your responsibility. So, if you are just a dev or a QA or a support guy or a DBA guy, then at least you should be able to know how to create a machine or a storage which is needed for your work. That is at least the minimum level. But if you are given a responsibility a little more, that you are going to manage an entire deployment activity, assume, then along with creating a machine and a storage, you might also do little more work, wherein setting up a network, allowing the port policies, whenever it is needed, you increase the storage space or increase the number of machines. So those things that you have to do. And finally, if you are going to be given a responsibility of being the administrator on cloud, then you might have to do something more. So this is how the problem statement is. Now all of us have to take care of infrastructure. Okay, even if it is not given to you, you should be having the ability to take this responsibility of creating the infrastructure. Okay, so it is not the question that, oh, only a DevOps engineer should create. So this is the reason I'm saying that there is nothing called as DevOps engineer. Anyone can start working in the culture of DevOps, then you will be called yourself as a DevOps engineer. So that way, now, instead of the traditional method of working, we are now going to have an additional responsibility where we should be managing the infra. Okay, at least to the least level is, you should be having the knowledge of managing existing infra needed for your development or testing or support work. Okay, However, if you have given a chance, you should also be able to create new infrastructure completely end to end. Okay. Now, regardless of all these things, now the focus and the problem statement is how do you make sure that I can quickly create an infrastructure which is needed rather than going through some multiple steps of clicking buttons? And how do I automate this wherein I can reproduce or recreate again and again whenever I want? Okay, just like how when I told that you have one container, you should be creating multiple containers whenever there is a need. The same way, now it is not like everyone will create infrastructure every day, but the focus here is you created something today for your development or testing. After 10 days, if I'm asking you, or you yourself is going to recreate a machine for whatever purpose, then you should not be again spending even there is a half an hour of work. So if you have automated that, your half an hour of work is also saved, that you can use it to do something else, right? That is the whole focus what we are trying to achieve. So that is when in DevOps, the next concept that we are going to focus is called as how do we automate the infrastructure management, wherein it could be a new infrastructure or it could be a existing infrastructure. Okay, getting this concept?
Yes, Adam.
This is where now, even for a simple infra creating, so you can see you need to have a AWS account. In that, you need to create a VPC and then create a security group and then create machines. And suppose if you say you want some load balancing to it and the application, you will be creating. So that's where this is what we call it as infrastructure. Okay. Yeah. Was there a question?
Yeah, Adam, I mean, for the infrastructure, as I'm from development background, so we don't know the concept of VPC security group. So how it can be helpful for us? So we have to learn all this concept, networking concepts.
Yeah. So this is where, like I said, it is the ability that you are going to tell. See, no one will come and tell you that, do you know this? But what we are trying to tell is, being a developer, if you also know this, it is going to be easy. And that is where I am trying to tell you. It's not mandatory for you to know each and everything from the network, but the more and more you know, it'll always be better for you. Okay. So that's the whole logic what we are trying to move towards. Now, that is how what we will do is, even if you are not familiar with those things, we will be just talking about certain basic concepts that if you know, it will be easy. Because tomorrow, if you go to a company and they are using AWS, at least you should be knowing what is the basics. Because now we will understand that basics of what is VPC and security. So now, so far, at least you should have got an idea that VPC means it's a private network. Okay, and security group means it is a similar thing of what we call it as the traffic management, right? Wherein whatever the traffic that should be going inside the VPC or to the AWS account and what should be coming out, you can manage that. So that's where you give the ports and tell what is allowed, what is not allowed. Whereas VPC is a private network within which all of things will be doing. But anyway, we will be going in a little deeper as we go. But for us to understand, this is where when you go to a company, rather than you just saying that I did development, whenever there was a need, I created my own machine. At least that you can tell. But not just a machine, at least you can say that, hey, I created a simple infra that is needed for my development that needed a machine or some storage or some small network where I have to modify certain things, I was able to do. So that should be good because you are adding some value to your profile by saying you can also do this. So this is how the more and more things that you know, you will be able to add more and more responsibility to your profile. And that's how you convert your profile from being just a developer into a DevOps profile. Okay, getting it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so since time is there, I don't want to rush it here so that tomorrow when we go, right, and again walk you from this. But what I'm stopping today is what is the problem statement? Don't worry about this. So the problem statement that we are looking at is now in an organization, whether you call yourself as a DevOps engineer or not, our expectation is we should be managing the infrastructure. That could be an existing or it could be a new infrastructure. In that, for our need, we might be creating some small infra, or if you are taking a responsibility as an admin, you might create a huge infrastructure to manage. So regardless of that, if we are taking up this responsibility of managing infra, we need to have an automated way where we can recreate the infrastructure anytime. And it should be a simple way instead of going through many steps. And it should be not prone to errors because it could be automated. And you should be able to manage multiple resources even if it is given to you so that it's cost effective. Okay, so how are you going to automate all those things? Because I don't want to waste my time in development or testing. If I need a machine, I should not be creating a ServiceNow ticket and wait for 1 day or even half a day to get me that, right? The same thing, if you know to do it and if you have the permissions, quickly you can go and create a machine, do that work and finish the work as soon as possible. That is how the development can happen continuously, testing can happen continuously. So continuous development or testing doesn't mean that they will just write code. For that, you should also have the basic infra needed that you can create. Because like the traditional method, if you say that I didn't have infra, then I couldn't work. So what will I do? That was the old way of people saying. But the new method that you say is, if you don't have a machine, why don't you create a machine? If you need access, I will give you access to create a machine. Go ahead and create. Don't wait for someone. So that's how the culture is changing to DevOps culture. Okay. But anyway, let me stop it here. So any questions so far?
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Adam.
Yeah. Any questions?
Adam, I have one question here regarding the Docker. So, I mean, while creating the container, we are giving a -v or we are mapping the volumes. By using the command like docker volume create, also we can create the volumes.
Yeah, but I don't want you to use that. So all those things are old steps. Okay, because we are not going to see that practically. You are not even going to use the Docker command at all anytime going forward. But the logic is what I want you to understand. Okay. Instead of this, we will be using Kubernetes a lot. So in the Kubernetes, we will see how do we create that. Okay. So I don't want you to spend time on Docker much.
Okay. And one more additional question. This is out of the topic. Adam, can you please explain the difference between the application server and the web application server?
Application server and web server. There is not like web application server. See, a very simple difference is if you have a web application that you want to run, okay, so it cannot run directly on a machine. So what you have to do is, so basically for running a web application, first you need to have something called as an application server. So what this application server will do, this is the one which will be helping to communicate from the host machine to the application. Okay, and this is where you will have tools like Tomcat or JBoss, your WebSphere, WebLogic, whatever comes here. Now, when you have your web application, you need to put your web application inside this application server and then run. Okay, so whatever in your company you are going to create a web application, it needs to run inside this application server. And the application server is the one which runs this application and enables the port, whatever that you want to be available on the host machine. Okay, so application server, as the name says, is the one which is used to run a web application inside it. Okay, so as we go through the CI/CD, I'll just take one example and show you how to do it. But logically now, if I have a web application, then if I have to run it, then along with it, I also need an application server like Tomcat JBoss. So that is where when you have a web application created, for running it, a company also uses Tomcat and JBoss. Okay. However, there is another application which is called as web server. Okay. Now, if it is confusing, all you have to remember is a web server is not used to run an application. So there are two purposes that you can use. Suppose if there is some static files that you have. Okay, so what do you mean by that? Suppose, let's assume you just have a direct HTML files or PHP files. Okay, if you want to directly access that, then this is not a web application. So for those kind of things, you can put it into a web server and you can directly access, which is where your Apache comes in. Okay, but however, when we are trying to do something called as load balancing or redirecting access to multiple applications, even at that time, you can make use of web server, which is where the most modern one, what you have is Nginx comes in. So what will happen? There will be some application, multiple copies of the application. If you want to do some load balancing to do the port redirection, then what you can do, a port coming from one application and shared to another location using this web server. So that is where the modern web servers like Nginx comes into the picture. If not, think of this logic. For doing the load balancing, and if there is a static file that you want to access directly, then you use this web server. For any kind of application, which is a web application that you want to run it, then you use the application server. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Any other questions?
Adam, Adam, we need to complete shell scripting tutorial as well along with Git.
It's not mandatory, but just try to spend every day a few minutes in that so that it will be easy. If I show you some examples later, right, you should be able to understand.
Okay, yeah.
So Adam, we have completed till now Git and Docker.
We haven't completed Docker. We have just
Okay,
seen there are a few more things that we will come back again. So what we have seen is only the container management.
okay.